Gracious Father in heaven, Lord, we just thank you for the time together. We thank you for the fellowship. We thank you for your grace and your mercy. Father, we just continue to lift up those in prayer that were expressed and all the praises that were expressed, that we, Father, as your people, would come together in unity, that there would be no differences among us, Father, as an army that is being prepared. An army cannot be in all different understandings and ideas and resistance, Father. An army must come into line and be ready for battle. So we just thank you for all you're doing to get us ready, Lord. We pray, Father, that our hearts would be fully surrendered to thee in full cooperation of the organization that you are putting in place. As we continue, Father, to review past studies, we find such a blessing in them that continue to strengthen us in our walk with thee. As we continue these revolution studies, Father, to reviewing them, we pray for Sister Adriana, as she's going to present the messages, that we would continue to have our minds enlightened on what the revolutions mean to us today. And also, Father, as we continue to grow in understanding of the work that was done in past histories when it comes to the union of church and state, we just pray, Father, that all these things would come together in our mind, that we would have the clarity we need, that we would be able to be ready, Father, to take this message as you are preparing their hearts to receive it. We pray to be prepared to give it. We thank you for the study that we had earlier this morning and just looking at the things that we need to do, self-control and self-discipline, bringing our appetites and passions in control of the higher powers. Father, all these things are a blessing to us to help us to better understand and grow closer and closer to thee, but also, Father, to be able to make us fit and ready to be a blessing to others as you're preparing them. So be with us, I pray, be with our Sister Adriana, and may we all receive a blessing together and be knit together, Father, tightly as one. We pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen.
Okay, so we're going to be going over the revolution study lines, and this is taken from video or presentation 42 and 43 from the Brazil School of the Prophets at the beginning of last year. No, 2 years ago, 2019. And prior to this, they were talking about the unification of church and state. And I think in the prior video, their focus was more on the Civil War, which, let me, because whether it's necessary or not, I like to doodle. So let me get my tablet thing here. Okay, so right here was what they were focusing on, the Civil War in the United States. And then for this presentation, it's this history of the Civil War and the revolution of 1794. However, for I think the majority of this presentation, she actually spends it during World War I in Germany. And it was a little bit hard to kind of keep track, but we are going to end up looking at that Civil War in Germany a little bit more because it had some interesting aspects to it that kind of helped me understand a little bit more what's going on with us here today, kind of. So I hope that's going to be helpful. But I'm gonna.
Sister Lana is asking you to speak a little closer to the mic.
Is this better? Hold on, let me see if this is on all the way. Yeah, it's on all the way. Let me see which mic this is using. LCS USB. Yep. Is this better, Lana?
Yes, a little. Thank you.
Okay, so
Yes, this is wonderful.
I'm like eating the microphone now. But it's okay. It's light enough. I'll be able to hold it. Um where? So I'm gonna she kind of goes to talk about Paula White and Trump and the church and state combination there, but I kind of just wanted to go focus on it seems like two different subjects and it's more geared towards what they were looking at prior. So I kind of just wanted to go to where she started talking about the actual revolutions, if that's okay.
Yeah, she was just reviewing the previous study on the midway point, all
Yeah.
the midpoints.
Yeah, midpoints, and then she started to talk about Trump's cabinet and something that it seemed like disconnected, which was probably just review from what she was talking about last time from the church and state, because it was all about the ministers in the White House. So, let's see here, path of truth and error. Okay, so she says here we'll look at the French Revolution. I'll make this bigger for you guys. I think that helps. Um, maybe that too. So we'll look at the French Revolution. It began in 1789. The midpoint is 1794, is what took us here, and it ends in 1799. The end of the revolution, what happened, the end of the revolution. So what happened in 1799 to end the revolution? It ends on November 9, 1799. Napoleon declares the end of the revolution and becomes a dictator. Our purpose, or what we're trying to achieve in studying these revolutions, is to determine 2019, November 9th. The French Revolution, 1789 to 1799, is 9/11, 2001. Then we have 2014, the midpoint, and then we have 2019, the end of the revolution, November 9th, 2019. So it starts at 9/11 and ends at November 9, 2019. In the French Revolution, on 11/9, Napoleon becomes a dictator in France and he declares the end of the revolution. And then here is that lineup, but it doesn't have the 2001 on there. There'll be other lines that do, though. So next we'll consider the Civil War, 1861 to 1863 to 1865. And again, 2001, 2014, and 2019. What took us to the French Revolution was the 220. What took us to the Civil War was the 151. So what we can observe is revolution from 9/11 to 11/9 this year. We want to look at some other revolutions in history. We're going to go first the German Revolution, directly after World War I. We're going to overlay the German Revolution with ours. One of the reasons, the original cause that we started seeing revolutions in that time is our time period, because it's external news that started connecting Donald Trump with these histories based on the date November 9. They couldn't ignore that connection. We're going to read some history of what was happening inside Germany towards the end of World War I. So, the fall of 1918, the leaders of Germany knew they could not win the World War. The generals were trying to convince the government, or particularly its leader, to form a new German government that was more democratic than that of the Kaiser. It's particularly the Navy. Towards the end of 1918, Germany is losing the war. One of the reasons there was a war in the first place is that Kaiser Wilhelm had decided to build this large navy to rival England. England took that as a threat. The leader of their navy decided that as they were most likely going to lose the war, he didn't want England taking their ships. So he decided to do the noble thing, lead the navy into a battle they were definitely going to lose. Um, then all their beautiful navy could go down in glory and all of their ships wouldn't be taken by the British. They would not have been able to defeat the British Navy, but you could imagine by the end of 1918 how the sailors felt about that plan. They mutinied and refused to set sail. That might have sounded like a glorious end to the generals, but to the sailors, they'd sacrificed everything for their country. Seeing their leadership fail, and they had families back home, and they weren't going to satisfy their generals by just dying and sinking their ships. So it began with this mutiny by the sailors on the 30th of October, 1918, where they refused to sail the Navy into battle with the British. So October 30th. So it's at the end of October and it ends in November. But it's called the November Revolution because the majority of it takes place in November. It doesn't end. It's I want to say kind of climaxed in November because November 9, the Kaiser abdicates. So it doesn't end until I think officially August the next year, if I remember right. So before we go any further, for me to understand revolution, okay, let me start off with history is complex. Every subject that you can learn can get very complex very quickly. And we know from Ramsey theory and all of that, that as human beings, we try to find patterns, and it's not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing because it's helpful in memorizing complex issues and memorizing details. It helps us to be able to map things out and continue to add more detail over time. So what people do is they take a complex issue and then they try to make models that help explain it in an easier way. And so you'll have different names for different models, and you have this in linguistics, you have this in science and math, you have this in history, everywhere you go. So I wasn't able to find a clear one for revolutions, but there's always so much happening when you have a revolution. And there is this guy who wrote a book called The Anatomy of a Revolution. And I just got a quick overview of two things he does in that book. He gives you 10 reasons, kind of main reasons that you'll see in history of why revolutions happen. And then 10 ways, where's my curve? Hold on. And then 10 ways that you'll kind of see them take place. So I want to look at that for a quick second. So anatomy of a revolution, kind of why they might happen, why you might see that they happen is, number one, people from all social classes are not happy. Two, people feel restless and held down by unacceptable, retry. It's supposed to be restrictions, hang on. I need to fix this. Where is it? Restrictions. So people feel restless and held down by unacceptable restrictions, by society, by religion, the economy, or government. People are hopeful for the future, this is number three, but they are being forced to accept less than what they hoped for. People are beginning to identify as a part of a social class, and there is a growing bitterness between social classes. For example, poor versus rich, or different races you could have. Number five, social classes that deal with each other on a regular basis seem to hate each other the most, which is interesting. Number six, the intellectuals give up on the way their society operates. And seven, the government does not respond to the needs of its society. Eight, leaders of the government begin to doubt government and themselves, and some leave it and join the opposition groups. Nine, the government is unable to gain enough support from any group to save itself. And back to number eight, I think like Bernie Sanders can be put in there because he was, he kind of left and decided to go real left wing, which was kind of, there's a whole history about socialism in the United States, which I never realized was such a, it's an interesting history to look at if you guys ever have a chance to. And Noam Chomsky comes up, and I kept hearing about him from people, but I never realized what he was or what he was doing. I just thought it would be interesting to figure out how socialism popped up in the United States, especially after it was so stigmatized during the Red Scare. But it's an interesting thing to look at. Anyways, number nine, the government is unable to gain enough support from any group to save itself. And number 10, the government cannot organize its finances correctly, and it's either going bankrupt or is trying to tax people heavily and unjustly. When you try to take people's money, that's kind of a one of the biggest things to get people upset. Jackie, you mean Noam Chomsky? He's kind of an anarchist, though, isn't he?
I'd say he's more libertarian type.
Yeah, I have to look into him more because I don't know. I know he's a very, very well educated fella. He's a laureate of some things and stuff, whatever that is.
Yeah, he's been around a long time. He's up in his 80s.
Yeah,
And,
he started a big work in like the 1950s, and
yeah, very much so. I mean, he's worth listening to. There's a lot of, he gives a lot of facts as to where we are now as a nation, as America's, going downhill. So
yeah,
he's recently posted quite a few videos
I know
on YouTube.
he's still alive, and he had a lot of commentary on Bernie Sanders and how he's appropriately upsetting the current class of older Democrats who are not wanting to change really much, not being drastic enough, which is interesting because we're going to see that in German society too. So I wanted to look at that.
Yeah, very interesting. I'm glad you brought up his name.
Yeah.
Because I could say, to everyone that he's worth listening to. It takes more time but you're looking at background and where we are, people with different thoughts about all this. It's not the mainstream liberal.
No, he's way more on the left there, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So that was like kind of 10 reasons why revolutions get how do you say kind of the fetters are getting lit, you know what I mean? The fire is starting to get lit under people because they're upset. Nothing is working right. All of society, no one is happy economically, socially, politically. Nothing is satisfactory to anyone anymore. And so people start branching out to the extremes to try to find an answer. So 10 ways that revolutions usually take place. The people want the government to do this, to do things that it could never do. That's what that's supposed to be. Where is that? Number 2, unsuccessful government attempts to suppress revolutionaries. Number 3, which Noam Chomsky was arrested many times. And I don't think Bernie was, but anytime that there are people on radical sides, they attempt to, which also, if you guys know, there's a huge demonstrations all over Russia last night because Navalny got arrested on baseless charges, not any charges at all, and he called for demonstration. So all over Russia, they were protesting Putin's lawlessness. Just wanted to point that out. I don't know if you guys talked about it yet, but it's interesting. Anyways, number 3, revolutionaries gain power and seem united. Number 4, once in power, revolutionaries begin to quarrel among themselves and unity begins to dissolve. This is why there is always chaos during a revolution, because there are different factions and powers all competing for supremacy, which I'm going to note that this also kind of happened in Germany. Hang on just a second with the PSD. SPD. Okay. And that's in Germany, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So moderates gained the leadership, but failed and this is the one that I thought was really interesting because it seems like the one in the US that's kind of happening right now. So moderates gained the leadership, but fail to satisfy those who insist on further changes. You always have this group who is kind of in the middle, who's trying to please both sides, but they just end up compromising and making everyone more unhappy. And this was a big thing that happened with the SPD in Germany. That's why that revolution failed there. But it was like a little bit of a counter revolution.
So So the compromise,
by the Spartacists. Huh?
so the compromiser,
Yeah, the compromiser.
they try to please both sides instead of taking care of the problem, like back in the Civil War, pre-Civil War, rather than solve the problem of slavery, they just tried to work together with everybody.
Yeah, and the two sides are so diametrically opposed that you can never compromise with one side to make the other happy. You know what I mean? Because there is no middle ground for either side. So you're trying to find something impossible. So you have Democrats who want health care, they want acceptance of all gender identities and rights for LGBTQ plus community and all of these things. And then you have the right that wants like no government in business, and they all these different things. So it's like you say to the Democrats, I'll give you your health care, but I'll take away LGBTQ rights. And then you go to, you know what I mean? Like you can't, it's not satisfactory to them. You can't do that. You're
And
not gonna,
eventually the people uprise over that.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So it just leads to more disaster. And that's why I think it's interesting. The way I have trouble understanding the way Tess pointed it out, the way she laid it out, but I still think there's interesting things that match Germany history and our history and what's happening with what's his name, with Biden right now. But anyways, we'll see at the end. Anyways, number 6, power is gained by progressively more radical groups until finally a lunatic fringe gains almost complete control. So I thought it was funny.
We're there.
He used the word lunatic.
Yeah.
Because I mean, that's accurate. And so in Germany, that's what ends up ultimately happening.
Yeah.
And Russia. Because Lenin didn't like what Stalin was doing. Stalin was just, a fringe, like a crazy person. It wasn't originally what Trotsky and Lenin were thinking about for Russia. It was a more extreme.
It's kind of like all that compromise and such buys time, but never, it drags things on and never solves the problem. And in the process, you anger and rise up all that whole other group.
Yeah, well, there's another one. Okay, so number 7, a strong man emerges and assumes great power. That's also Russia and Germany. And then number 9, the extremists try to create their perfect version of society and kill all opponents. That's a nice, strong component of the French Revolution, as we know. And Hitler and Stalin did that as well. It just shoved everyone into prisons or camps or gulags, whatever you want. And then when they can't take care of you anymore, they just kill you. But anyways, number 9 is a period of terror occurs, or chaos, and we have seen that multiple times. But then 10 is and I think this is a very rare exception where a moderate group reigns power and the revolution is over, because it's I mean, you'd have to have a pretty large, powerful moderate group, and they'd have to be like in charge of the military or something for that to pass. But I don't know where that happens. Well, no, so that happens usually after so you have those many years of Hitler in power in Germany, but after that a moderate group takes over, and then you have the revolution is over, right? And then the same thing in Russia in 1989, that extreme left is gone, and now you have a more moderate group taking over. So it's kind of like you have this crazy fanatical system or person that takes over, and that can last decades. But eventually, because it's all extremes on either side, no one is going to be satisfied with that after a while anyways, and ultimately it's going to revert back to that moderate thing, and then the revolution is over, because it's the only way to kind of stabilize things, I guess. I'm not sure. Ali says, but will it be a big civil war like the North and South in the 1800s? No, it's more of, it's an information war. It's not a physical with weapons. Our weapons are information.
No,
But
I know that.
Oh yeah.
I was just asking about the Civil War. Sister Elaine says it started at 9/11 as the partisan divide grew. And I know, so we're in the Civil War right now, basically, right?
The revolution now,
We're in the revolution.
the counter-revolution. So we had Civil War, and I remember from the very early on in these studies, she said that she did a lot of research trying to determine the difference, but then she found that they were basically the same thing, Civil War and revolution. So the Civil War began at 9/11 when they started to, blame say that this nation was being judged by God because we took God out of everything. And so this big partisan divide happened and everything else, there's many things going on. But so this divide between the Republicans and the Democrats started to really polarize and continue on all the way to where we're at. But then it culminated in the overturning of a government, because that's the reason that they do it. What she's showing here, that it's to overturn a government that's in place, and they want to overturn the establishment and then set up this new government. And that's what Trump represented, was this setting up of this new government. So the counter revolution is to try to undo the government that was just set up.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Mhm.
I didn't mean bloodbath like what it was like then with weapons. I'm just wondering, because that was a big civil war over slavery, and I don't want to take away from what Sister Adrienne is doing. I was just kind of wondering if we're still seeing more, but now we're okay. I just have to do some more reading. Thank you.
It's well, we've been in the Civil War. The way it looks with all the messiness, there are some extremist people who are going to go out there and protest and get violent, but the majority of it is misinformation online.
Yeah, the two streams of information.
Yeah,
True
and that
information and false.
yeah, and that has casualties too. So it's hard. It's just crazy because no other age has had anything like this, like an information warfare, and it just looks so different from. I struggle honestly a lot to wrap my head around how to see it like that, and there's rare occasions where it manifests itself externally like it did January 6th, and then it becomes kind of like a moment of clarity where like, oh yeah, that's all these online message boards where all this crazy stuff happened and look what it led to.
Mhm.
And so then you had people die there. I mean, it's casualties of information war. And then now QAnon is completely falling apart because it was all a joke apparently. And all these people are like, it's just insanity. But it has its casualties, and it is a real war. It's just because it's never happened like this before, it's hard to call it that, to see it.
It is also, the documents that we've been reading too in that book, The Evangelicals, really helping to understand how we got to this point because of the two streams, which became so necessary for us to understand, because those two streams they go way back, those two streams always being seen, but it produced such inequalities, and one side, fighting, like we've been reading, one side fighting for this to be a white Christian nation, demanding that it is a white Christian nation, always has been, and but it's come to a head, basically fighting over these two sides.
Yeah. So we've kind of reached a spot where I knew this was going to happen because I also have the same confusion. And so I'm just going to lay it out, and it's something we're eventually going to have to deal with, but I'm sure it's something we're all kind of confused about. So we have, wow, that's way too big. Nope. It's not. Why aren't you? Hold on. Okay, so we have, I'm just gonna put 2001, and then our midpoint I think she said was 2014.
Mhm.
And then we have 2019, the 9th. No, and then the 11th. 9/11, and then
11/9.
I messed up, yeah. 11/9, 9/11. Okay. So it's within this time span here that we have the revolution and counter revolution, and then the end of it all in this year. And this was when we were saying that Trump goes for 2 terms consecutively. So that isn't what happened. And I think this is an issue that's going to have to get clarified with like the revolution and counter revolution and what that looks like. Because it's not, do you know what I mean?
Just to make sure that I heard you, maybe you didn't mean to say it this way, but the counter revolution began in 2020. Did you just say that the counter revolution ends at 2019?
Okay, so if maybe that's where I'm confused. Because from what I was reading here, where was it? So the way she lines up the lines, let me see if I can find it.
It would be down further because it would be down further where you have where she extends it off after 2020 and 2021.
Oh, Kaiser abdicated. I see. So Kaiser abdicated 2019, and then there's a counter revolution.
Right.
Okay, but none of it. Okay, let's go through the history and then we'll see where my confusion is, and maybe you can help me out. But the revolution study is one that's really confusing for me. So, okay, I think I was back home and they were kind of, yeah, okay, so we were here now. News of this mutiny spread throughout Germany. So that's the one about the Navy not wanting to go burn their ships down in great glory for the generals of the Navy. So news of this mutiny spread throughout Germany, and many more people started to rise up and join them in supporting the sailors. All across Germany, this revolution swelled for about 11 days until November 9th of 1918. Many of the workers left the factories. This is in Berlin. They marched in thousands to the center of the city, men, women, and children, wounded soldiers, war widows. They all left their factories and started marching to the center of Berlin to the army barracks. The barracks were barred, shut down. They were expecting a violent uprising, so they had guns and rifles in every window to fire on the crowd if needed. But the army refused to fire on their own people. They threw down their weapons and opened the gates, and all the leading officers surrendered because of this swelling revolution. Kaiser Wilhelm and the German leaders of government all stood down, and Kaiser Wilhelm fled. So who were the people making this revolution? It was the socialists. The kind of everyone on the side of SPD. So there was a couple different socialist groups in the German government. The SPD, Socialist Democratic Party, and then there was the Communist Party, Communist Democratic Party. I'm just going to put the Communist. And so the socialists are the ones that was kind of encompassing all the workers that were feeling disenfranchised and kind of frustrated with how much they given up for the war, and just things weren't working out, social economic situation. So they were all sick of it, and they were all opposed to the war in the first place, but they kind of backed it for some reason. So it was the socialists that started this revolution. And then we're going to quote from a German newspaper on November 10th. The next day, he says that on the morning of November 9, everything is still there. They have a king, Kaiser Wilhelm, the chief of police, the heads of their government. By the afternoon of November 9, everything has been swept away, all the government. The Kaiser abdicated, and it's the end of the monarchy, the end of the system of government that has led Germany all through that past history. So if we go here, the German Revolution or November Revolution, this is just from Wikipedia, was a civil conflict in the German Empire at the end of the First World War that resulted in the replacement of the German federal constitutional monarchy with a democratic parliamentary republic that later became known as the Weimar Republic. So the revolutionary period lasted from November 1918 until the adoption of the Weimar Constitution in August 1919. Among the factors leading to the revolution were the extreme burdens suffered by the German population during the 4 years of war, the economic and psychological impacts of the German Empire's defeat by the Allies, and growing social tensions between the general population and the aristocratic and bourgeoisie elite. The first acts of the revolution were triggered by the policies of the Supreme Command of the German Army and its lack of coordination with the Naval Command. In the face of defeat, the Naval Command insisted on trying to precipitate a climactic pitched battle with the British Royal Navy by means of its Naval Order of 24th October 1918. But the battle never took place. Instead of obeying their orders to begin preparations to fight the British, German sailors led a revolt in the naval ports of Wilhelmshaven on 29 October 1918, followed by the Kiel Mutiny in the first days of November. These disturbances spread the spirit of civil unrest across Germany and ultimately led to the proclamation of a republic to replace the imperial monarchy on 9 November 1918, 2 days before Armistice Day. Shortly thereafter, Emperor Wilhelm II fled the country and abdicated his throne. So the revolutionaries, inspired by liberalism and socialist ideas, did not hand over power to Soviet-style councils as the Bolsheviks had done in Russia, because the leadership of the Social Democratic Party, that's the SPD, of Germany, opposed their creation. So the SPD opted instead for a national assembly that would form the basis for a parliamentary system of government, fearing an all-out civil war in Germany between militant workers and reactionary conservatives. The SPD did not plan to strip the old German upper classes completely of their power and privileges. Instead, it sought to peacefully integrate them into the new social democratic system. In this endeavor, SPD leftists sought an alliance with the German Supreme Command. This allowed the army and the Freikorps, nationalist militias, to act with enough autonomy to quell the communist Spartacist Uprising of 14 to 15 January 1919 by force. So the same alliance of political forces succeeded in suppressing leftist uprising in other parts of Germany, with the result that the country was completely pacified by late 1990. So basically, the point that I wanted to pull out from here is the SPD was the one who had the majority of the people behind them. But what the SPD did is they decided to be moderate. They didn't want a complete overhaul of the whole system, because what they saw was that tensions were going to get so high that there was going to be an insane amount of violence and issues. So they tried to kind of moderate the situation and be kind of complementary or compromise with the right-sided part of the government. And that's why you end up having the Spartacists. I'm totally gonna spell that wrong. That's why you have the Spartacists in January start their counter-revolution, because the SPD is failing them. So if we go back to up here, because I thought this was interesting how I was matching that. It goes back to moderates gain the leadership but fail to satisfy those who insist on further changes. You always have this group who is kind of in the middle, who's trying to please both sides, but they just end up compromising and making everyone more unhappy. And that seems to be what the SPD did. And then the Spartacists, which were even more leftist than the Social Democrats were, came in after. So if we go back, I may have lost. Okay, so here. So we're going to quote from a German newspaper on November 10th. The next day, he says that on the morning of November, oh, we already read that. So there was an end to that system of government by the afternoon. So Hitler talked about this day in his autobiography. He wrote in 1923, 5 years later. He was fighting in World War I. He tells the story about himself, and he uses the language of Jesus on the cross. He says that he was called in with all the men to hear about what had just happened to the government, the end of World War I, their defeat. He talks about the impact this had on him, and this is really what formed the backbone of his propaganda machine. The story of November 9, how Germany was undefeated, this heroic nation had been stabbed in the back by their own people, by traitors, and he put a lot of that on the Jewish people. But remember, Hitler is World War II line, and so he's using the reasoning of the revolution of the World War I line to boost himself in the World War II line.
Because if I understood it correctly, he thought those sailors were all traitors to the government.
The sailors, the factory workers, everyone. And he said it's because we let so many Jews in. And they let Jews in, and they let different people from different countries in a way to stimulate the economy, because there was an issue with that. And so there's different decisions. There's another thing I want to read real quick when I'm done with this paragraph, talking about that kind of German nationalism and why it was happening and what this discussions were happening, and how they got to that nationalism, and then where socialism comes in, because that's what we're having here in the United States. And the way our history matches with Germany is really incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, as we've been reading those documents, I've said it a few times, that it's amazing we haven't had our own Hitler. But I'm kind of seeing that, and help me if I'm wrong on this part, but these revolutions or civil war, they're kind of like maybe it depends on which one, but it's like this opportunity to reset and get yourself right. But
Yeah.
you don't ever get right because you put those moderates in there that just make everybody else even more unhappy.
Yeah, so
Nobody gets satisfied.
I'm gonna be one of these Ramsey theory people, humans, and I'm gonna make my own little model
Okay.
to try to explain the way I'm seeing it. But you have, let's say you have a climax to tensions where nobody is happy anymore. Everyone's tempers are way up here. So the government that comes next cannot be one that's moderate, that guided you back in this time period, because this is why tensions got up to here. People lost hope, people lost faith in a moderate government, and they don't think that that has the answers anymore. So the government that has to come next is a pretty intense, high strung, either one extreme or the other. So I'll say socialist or fascist, right? And then after a period of this craziness, people start to get irritated with this, and their tensions go, against that government. And now you can come in and have like a more moderate kind of government again. But this period of time, you have like the Russia during the whole USSR, you have Germany during Hitler, this whole time period. You know what I mean? So I don't know if this is like a clear model or whatever, but it's just that tensions rise so high and dissatisfaction happens so much with the moderate government that you had, one where everyone was kind of trying to work together on things, that the government that you have to have after this, it can't be a moderate one. It has to be something extreme that you think is going to solve all the answers. But usually it doesn't, and then it reverts back to something more moderate.
No, and like in the Civil War, you had the abolitionists that actually stated that they believed that this nation was being judged over slavery. So you have the one side that is totally pro-slavery, and the other side that is totally anti-slavery, and then you have those moderates that want to please everybody. And 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 you have today you have the same scenario where you have the side that believes that all of this is okay and want to continue. They have a threat that comes at them and they want to continue their lifestyle as it is. But what God is saying, this is like what she was, if I understood yesterday, that there comes a time, like in the Civil War, going 1850 on into the Civil War, it's not tolerated. It's not tolerated. It's time to fix the problem. And what they did, though, was they didn't look at the actual problem. Instead, they tried to preserve the Union.
Yeah, and so it makes sense why you had like the Union come up here and they had to deal with the issue of slavery, but then at the end, racism still ends up coming back in the United States, you know
Right.
what I mean? And they still end up compromising throughout the history. That's why we're back in the
Right.
same mess again.
It never went away. They just changed the appearance of it.
Yeah, they had one massive, like, big skerfuffle that kind of, quieted down the Confederacy and put them into submission, whether they liked it or not. But I mean, how soon after that did the KKK come in?
Right.
Because they can't handle that. That's just not. Anyways, so the only way to kind of keep things going, and it had to be a fight. That's why it constantly had to be a fight with the civil rights movement, with desegregation, and all of these things. It had to be a constant fight because the United States always had racism. And you have the two sides, which is like the two kinds of bullies that I've known in my life. There's the one that's going to be a bully straight to your face and call you names straight to your face and be straightforward about it, and that seems kind of like the Republicans. But then on the left, you have people who will say nice things to your face and pretend that you're great friends, and then behind your back, call you all kinds of nonsense. So on either side, there's been extremists, but on one side, they try to at least fight for gaining some rights for people. And like in the North, there was a lot of people who were against slavery for racist reasons. Like, what was it? They wanted the slaves. They thought they should go back to Africa, or they just wanted to stop
Yeah.
slavery for just reasons that they just don't want them here because they don't want to intermix or something, just but on the left there was also the people that were fighting for the right reasons, for the right issues. So it's a lot of sifting, and it's a lot more complex, and that's what Parminder says, is that you can't just oversimplify it. It's a lot more complicated.
Yeah.
But this is just definitely.
It is interesting that it is what the issues that we're all witnessing are the issues that God is allowing to come to the surface to separate out his people, to cut out his people.
Yeah, and in the end, it's God's way that's the only correct way. So we'll see. And there's people who I've seen on the left who see things that left has issues with. The left is always questioning itself and the world it lives in, you know what I mean? That's why there's so many different ideas kind of floating around, and there's people who are this type of liberal or that type of liberal. And there are people out there that I've seen talk about, it doesn't make sense that I should have to wear makeup. I don't see how that's empowering to women. It makes us still have to wear it at work and all this stuff. It doesn't, you know what I mean? There's women out there who get that, and they're like, well, yeah, I'm on the left, but also we do some things that don't make sense sometimes. Anyways, let me go back to, where was I? Did I read that?
You were partway into it. Let's see, he says this was his crucifixion, somewhere around in there in his autobiography about himself and about Christ.
Oh, the propaganda machine. Okay, I remember.
You're kind of in the middle here. Yeah.
Yeah. So the story, I'm going to start right here. The story of November 9, how Germany was undefeated, this heroic nation that had been stabbed in the back by their own people, by traitors. And he put a lot of that on the Jewish people. So he talks in his autobiography of himself as if he were Christ. He says this was his crucifixion. We put our line over the reform line of Christ. This is the cross. A different application. He says how he was completely broken in body and soul at the news of Germany's defeat. Then he has this resurrection as if a dying prophet. All of a sudden, he has this vision. It's hard to paraphrase his writing in the same way it's hard to read Trump's writing, but in a different way, he waxes poetical and very descriptive and emotional. He says how he stumbled groping back to the room and covers himself in his blankets and pillows, went through this experience that he describes as crucifixion and resurrection, and he says that coming out of this, as part of this resurrection, I resolved now to become a politician. Interesting little thing there. So I wanted to go to this, and I think I still have it up. Hang on. So I'm going to screen share the internet and history of, which one is this? 1980, no, the German Revolution. Hold on, let me get that link real quick. Okay, so German nationalism. German nationalism, this is kind of a history of how it was happening throughout the years there, is an ideological notion that promotes the unity of Germans and German speakers into a nation state. So if you guys remember from like World War I, you had Austria-Hungary. There was no real physical Germany yet, but they all spoke like a Germanic language in that area. So you had Austria, Hungary, Prussia. Hang on. Sorry.
Bless you.
Thanks. There were just a bunch of little kind of provinces and areas around there. And so they started having discussions on, can we make this like one big country? We all speak the same language and have the same culture. We all kind of look the same. A lot of countries ended up doing that. Romania did that because it was split into 3 different provinces, but they all spoke the same language and had, the same culture. So that ended up being its own country. And Germany ended up being its own country. And so during the talks of this cultural identity of who you are and how you're going to organize yourself as a nation is kind of where this nationalistic ideology came through, and it got pretty savage towards the end. So German nationalism emphasizes and takes pride in the national identity of Germans. The earliest origins of German nationalism began with the birth of Romantic nationalism during the Napoleonic Wars, when Pan-Germanists started to rise. So Pan-Germanism, you see this whole little map here, all little different provinces. Pan-Germanism, also occasionally known as Pan-Germanicism, is a pan-nationalist political idea. Pan-Germanists originally sought to unify all the German-speaking people and possibly also Germanic-speaking peoples in a single nation state known as Grobdeutschland. So in the 19th century, Germans debated the German question over whether, so the 19th century is the 1800s, okay? So in the 19th century or the 1800s, Germans debated the German question. So the German question was a debate in the 19th century, especially during the Revolution of 1848, over the best way to achieve a unification of all the most lands inhabited by Germans. From 1815 to 1866, about 37 independent German-speaking states existed within the German So over whether the German nation state should be comprised a lesser Germany, and a lesser Germany relates essentially to Germany without Austria. So in the 19th century, a part of the Austrian Empire belonged to the German Confederation. In the Revolutionary era, it was discussed whether Austria or a part of Austria could belong to a new German federal society or something. I don't want to change the page right now. So that excluded Austria, or a greater Germany that included Austria. So the faction led by Prussian Chancellor Otto von Bismarck succeeded in forging a lesser Germany. Aggressive German nationalism and territorial expansion was a key factor leading to both world wars. So they want territorial expansion. And so what Otto von Bismarck here did was not, great in the nationalist eye, because you would have wanted a greater territory. So prior to World War I, Germany had established a colonial empire in hopes of rivaling Britain and France. In the 1930s, the Nazis came to power and sought to create a greater Germanic Reich, emphasizing ethnic German identity and German greatness to the exclusion of all others, eventually leading to the extermination of Jews, Poles, Romani, and other people deemed untermenschen or subhuman, and the Holocaust during World War II. This just goes right back to that document that we were reading last Sabbath, and I think you guys read more of it on Friday.
Yeah, they just, I have no idea the depth of nationalism, but they just each deem those that they don't like, and some of them always seem to be the same categories that they don't like, and deem them as less than human, subhumans. And it's amazing.
Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting at the inaugural, I brought this up the other day at the inaugural address, that the whole inaugural ceremony, that the different nationalities and ethnicities, I guess I would say, the different ethnicities that were present, and based on the documents that we've been reading, what they say is they're not capable of becoming Americans. They're not capable of understanding and understanding the Constitution and being American. They're not hard workers. They're not this. They're not that. You can't educate them. You can't. They're just not capable. And yet, we see in multiple ethnicities, it was on display for their talent and how they, and what their ability, their skill, their knowledge, their understanding, their strength. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, it's
just flat out hate.
Exactly. But
Flat out hate.
And that comes from fear.
Yeah.
So you have to,
fear. Yeah.
So that's what Trump played on, fear of job loss. And all of the hate against immigrants, they're taking our jobs. They're taking our jobs for lower rates, and they're cutting us out of this economy. That's why our lives are so hard and we can't afford anything. That's why we don't have jobs, is because of all these immigrants. Or they're not constitutional in their heart. They're just spies here from their other countries. It's all coming from irrational fear. So when you go on Fox News, when you go on conservative news outlets, when you go and listen to Trump, you can't anymore. But when you did that, all of these conspiracy theories of they're stealing the children, they're all pedophiles, they're this, they're that, and it's all based off of emotion. Like Elder Tess wrote in here, what Hitler was doing was making a very emotional call.
Which is the same techniques that SCL, the Behavioral Dynamics Group, then Institute, and SCL, Cambridge Analytica, did. They used the very same techniques to get people to have a emotional response based on the fear, right? So I might have said that wrong.
No, that was exactly right. That's exactly what they did. Because for some reason, that fear response is a very powerful motivator.
Yeah.
And it puts you in a state of mind when you have, and I'm sure there's studies on this. I'm pretty sure I've heard some before, but when you're in a state of fear, you're not thinking logically because you don't have time to decipher if something is right or wrong. You're in a fight or flight. You have to make decisions quickly, which are usually based on the wrong things, and you end up making the wrong choices for the sake of protecting yourself and your family. You know what I mean? There was that analogy that Parminder used where if you're a woman walking alone at night and you hear footsteps behind you and there's a guy and you think you see a gleam of a knife or whatever, you're in fight or flight. You don't know for a fact whether that person is trying to hurt you or not, but you don't have time to decide, that they're not, or to try to figure out the situation, because in that moment you just went into fast brain fight or flight situation.
Yeah.
So it's a very effective tool when people use fear, and it's still being used everywhere, and I've seen it all over the place. And you need to be able to stop and slow down and think about things. So
And that's why, to me, it's this history that we've been learning makes it easier to be able to have conversations with people. Just to, wherever the Lord leads, whoever he's leading us to speak to that day, and he knows what to say, and, keep that always in our prayers, because sometimes, like with us, if everybody remembers what Elder Tess said about, conspiracy theories and Walter Veith, how, I think she's trying to remember what she used chemistry, I think, as part of her example, and I'm missing the details, but how that one piece of information just totally dispelled everything. So we're learning these histories that are giving us things that are meant to help people, those pieces of information that will help people to see the piece of information that's going to help them, to come free from some of these fears of who they made enemies out of whatever flavor they picked, you know what I mean? Whether it be the Jews, the Catholics, the even the Seventh-day Adventists, the Mormons, and what you call the free thinkers. They make enemies out of these people, but just the right information at the right time. It's a piece of information that's truth that will sit on somebody's heart and mind and perhaps cause them to think for
exactly.
themselves.
Yeah. And to put someone's in the right mind, you can't be hostile, you know what I mean? Because
Exactly, you can't.
it puts them in a flight or flight again, and then they can't think logically again.
Right.
So for someone to be in a mindset that they can actually listen to you, they have to feel comfortable, and you have to be nice, you have to make a nice conversation. You can't be mean-spirited at all. It doesn't have the right effect. You're just argue.
Spirit.
Exactly. Oh, for the global warming cursing, do you remember? Because I can't remember.
Yeah, the ice she was talking about.
Because I can't remember how it goes, but in a conspiracy theory, they were saying, well, we have all this water and it hasn't gotten up bigger so far. And she was going along with all that until somebody explained to her, well, if all this glacier ice melts, because it's above the surface, if all that melts, it's going to raise the water. And then she got it. And that was her example. I don't think I explained it very well, but it was a different look of the way the ice was, the glaciers were, and the amount of space it takes up.
Yeah, so what she did though is that she kept an open mind to more evidence. And when you close yourself off to that, then you can't grow. And I think because of some conservative beliefs, we thought we had to close our minds to, you know what I mean? But she did, that seems to be what got her where she is, because she always seemed to have an open mind to be able to look at things logically. We have to do that. So after the defeat of the Nazi Germany, the country was divided into East and West Germany in the opening acts of the Cold War, and each state retained a sense of German identity and held reunification as a goal, albeit in different contexts. The creation of the European Union was in part an effect to harness German identity to a European identity. West Germany underwent its economic miracle following the war, listen to this, which led to the creation of a guest worker program. Of foreign or migrant workers, particularly those who had moved to West Germany between 1955 and 1973 seeking work as part of a formal guest worker program. Other countries had similar programs. In the Netherlands and Belgium, it was called the Gastarbeiter. I'm butchering these, I'm sorry. But many of these workers ended up settling in Germany, which has led to tensions around questions of national and cultural identity, especially with regard to Turks who settled in Germany. So German,
That was another thing I noticed with that, was because they want to be nationalistic, but they don't have a problem bringing in some slave labor. And if you can't have slavery anymore, where they're totally free, then let's just make sure that they don't get an education and they're only capable of earning, such a small wage. And they still do the same thing. So they use them at their will. They want to be a white society, a white nation, but they still don't have a problem using them.
exactly. It's
Really
like
bad.
it is. They bring you in just to smack you upside the head with who you are. It just doesn't make any sense. You know what I mean? And it's sad that it's so hard to get people to see that.
Hatred.
Yep. So German reunification was achieved in 1990 following Die Wende, which is the process of socio-political change that led to the opening of East Germany. So this was after the wall fell. An event that caused some alarm both inside and outside Germany. Germany has emerged as a power inside Europe and in the world. Its role in the European debt crisis and in the European migrant crisis have led to criticism of German authoritarian abuse of its power. So again, that moderate thing came in after Hitler and all of that revolution, but that racism never ended. It stayed in there. It just doesn't want to go away. All that discrimination business. So that's the nationalism of it. And then I wanted to look real quick at the socialism of it. This one's a little bit longer, and I think this publication tends to kind of lean more leftist, but it had some interesting points here. So I'm going to skip some paragraphs here. I'm going to start right here, and I'm going to see, I should be able to, yes. Oh, that's so much better. Okay. This coincides, so hold on. As capitalism enters probably its worst crisis since the 1930s, discussion is already developing as to what will be the economic and social political impacts. As banks and stock markets fell, the specter arose of another Great Depression, lodged in popular memory as a period of economic disaster, deprivation, bitter struggles, civil wars, and of course the rise of fascism, particularly in Germany. So this coincides with the 90th anniversary in Germany of the overthrow of the Kaiser and the beginning of the 1918 to 23 revolution. So they mark it a little bit farther. I'm not sure why they stick it all the way out there. I think it's because it's more left leaning and they're trying to make it seem fancier than it was. But everywhere else I see it, it's 1918 to 1919. So just wanted to point that out. So the issue of Weimar, meaning the history and fate of the first German Republic born in 1918 to 19, has never completely disappeared in post-1945 Germany. The famous revolutionary martyrs of the beginning of the revolution, Karl Liebknecht, and particularly Rosa Luxemburg, are not forgotten. Oscar Lafontaine, the co-leader of Germany's third biggest party, Die Linke, the left, for example, mentioned both in his speech to its first Congress last May. The media picture often painted is that the 1930s economic collapse almost directly led to Hitler's victory. Sometimes the hyperinflation of 1923 is thrown in as well as a reason for the Nazi success. However, as Leon Trotsky first explained, this was not the case. The immediate key source of Hitler's triumph lay in the refusal of the German Social Democratic Party SPD leadership to break with capitalism and later the ultra-leftism of the Communist International leadership, which led it in practice to reject a united front of works organizations against fascism. So the left party, the leftist party, because they decided to compromise, finagled things in such a way that it eventually led to a Hitler. And whatever this is with Biden, I'm pretty sure it's a counter revolution, but because they're moderating, like we see with the Civil War, again, all these lines have different aspects that we're taking into our time. They don't all exactly match. But from the Civil War part, we see that that kind of attempt to compromise leads to failure. Ultimately, it doesn't lead to gaining anything useful. So we know that it's going to go revert back to conservatism. Anyways, where was I? However, okay. So party of the SPD leadership to break with capitalism, later the ultra-leftism of the Communist International leadership, which led it in practice to reject a united front of workers' organizations against fascism. So they just didn't want to fight the fight. However, as in most attempts to mislead, there is a grain of truth in the idea that one source of Hitler's success was the 1923 crisis, but 1923 is not simply the widely known hyperinflation. Fundamentally, it is the story of a missed opportunity. Germany in 1923 saw the end of the revolution that had begun in 1918, but also was the one occasion so far when a majority of the working class in an industrialized imperialist country supported a revolutionary Marxist party in the shape of the German Communist Party. So I'm guessing they're just saying that SPD and KPD lost majority support in 1923. So I think that's what they're calling the end of the revolution. I'm not 100% sure. But basically what happened is that trying to be moderate just didn't help them at all. Yeah, Brother Troy, that's what's gonna happen. It's not gonna last. It's so for being moderate, and I saw this online and I thought it was an interesting point someone was making, that on Biden's inauguration day, the people on the left were obsessed with a little meme by of Bernie Sanders. Or they were more obsessed with Michelle Obama. I don't know if any of you guys saw, there was like Bernie Sanders was sitting in a chair or something and everyone was obsessed with it and everyone was saying it should have been Bernie. It should have been Bernie. He is way more leftist than Biden. So already that seed of dissent is in there. They're not going to be satisfied in any way with what Biden does. He signed some things to undo what Trump did, but yeah, Jackie, so you saw, but it's basically, it wasn't the candidate that they wanted. The people who were all the way on the left who wanted social democracy, they are not happy with this outcome, and they did it just to get rid of Trump, but now that Biden's here, that unhappiness is going to simmer and start to boil, and it's going to get bad. And we know that that's how it works, because all the examples kind of show us there's no way to show that it's going to stay nice at all. So anyways, I have no idea where I was in here. So he died a soldier. Okay, so we're at the beginning. So he died a soldier and resurrected a politician. He saw this as his moment, that he sees himself as Germany's savior. This really becomes the backbone of his propaganda machine into World War II. So all the history of Germany through World War II, you can center it around the date of November 9, whether that's when Hitler tried to take power by force, when the Holocaust turns violent, or when Hitler would do his public speeches, which then coincided with his assassination. It's not sure he actually had this experience, but whether or not he actually went through that experience, he really used this date as the backbone of his philosophy, that Germany should have never lost the World War. Then it's intentionally used to manipulate the people, It's a method of manipulation and control based on emotion, how people in their own country have betrayed their country, and he's the only one that can save it. Remember, we're taking all of this to 1918. So it's not even true what he's saying that they could have won the World War I. That was never true because their resources were extinguished and they didn't have a strong enough navy. It was never going to happen. But he wants to bring back that idea of national pride, that it's not our fault that we lost the war, it was these outsiders' fault. You know what I mean? And it's not true, but it's a convenient place to place blame instead of taking responsibility. Because the people on the left were never for entering the war. The reason why they did was for that wanting of imperial, expansion. So that aggressive nationalism that wanted to expand and have more territory, it ended up, not doing great, which is kind of, so it's just a place blame. So it was in 1923, November 9th, that he tried to take over Germany by military force. What he was trying to do was to repeat the work of Mussolini in Italy. Mussolini marched on Rome and took Italy by force, and Hitler tried to do the same thing in Germany on November 9. So even in 1923, he's seeing the importance of the date, November 9. What is harnessing is that emotion of the people, that sense of betrayal and humiliation. So there's that emotional stimulus. He failed in that attempt, and he took power in the 1930s, 10 years later. But that makes November 9 a public holiday when he comes into power, to remember this date, November 9, 1918. And then also to remember his failed attempt to come into power. So November 9 became a public holiday under the Nazi government. Hitler would do speeches to rally support, which is why this was really a useful day to try to assassinate him. Many of his assassination attempts were either on this day or around it. But we weren't going into the history of World War II yet. We're just talking about World War I and this revolution that ends on November 9 with the abdication of Kaiser Wilhelm. So now we're going to look at the counter-revolution. So when the Kaiser abdicated, also the Chancellor abdicated, and this left a vacuum in their government. Another fellow took over, Friedrich Ebert. He took over government, but there was a problem. They had rivals. So Ebert takes over the government, but they have rivals known as the Spartacists. This effort of the Spartacists took time to swell. They needed a period of preparation. There was an incident on Christmas Eve of 1918, but it didn't really begin until January 5, 1919, where there was a counter-revolution. This is the pattern that we want to start observing. It began with the revolution we've already placed, that with the French Revolution, and it takes us to November 9 and the rising up of Napoleon. We placed that by the 2014 midpoint. Then we placed the American Civil War. Again, what took us there was 1863, and that midpoint at 2014. Then when we consider the German Revolution, we can tie it to November 9. There's a revolution. The Kaiser abdicates, so their king is overthrown. It's the end of the monarchy in Germany. There's a new leader, but there's also another party. They take time to prepare, to gather their forces and launch a counter-revolution. That counter-revolution begins the following year, early in 1919. The counter-revolution is defeated in May the same year. They armed hundreds of workers and unionists, and they attempted an armed takeover of Berlin. They took over all of the government buildings, police stations, etc. They took over the checkpoints, bridges, all of those areas. And these notes, by the way, are Elaine's notes, so they're available on the website. But this is, I think from Wikipedia you had on there, which is a good explanation of the part of the Spartacists. So the Spartacist Uprising, also known as the January Uprising, was a general strike in Berlin from 5 to 12 January 1919. Germany was in the middle of a post-war revolution, and two of the perceived paths forward were social democracy and a council republic similar to the one which had been established by the Bolsheviks in Russia. The uprising was primarily a power struggle between the moderate Social Democratic Party of Germany, the SPD, led by Friedrich Ebert, and the radical communists of the Communist Party of Germany, the KPD, led by Karl Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg, who had previously founded and led the Spartacist League. So it was the moderate Democrats versus the far left Communist Party. So the Spartacist uprising in Berlin, a power struggle in Germany, erupted on January 5th, 1919. Okay. So end of October, the naval military uprising, which slowly grew into where all the workers striked on November 9, Kaiser abdicates, and then slowly the counter-revolution starts to swell, which is the Spartacists, the more far-leaning Communist Party. And then that's quelled by May. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So we won't go through all that history, but the government raises up about 40,000 soldiers and crushed this revolution that was waged between January and May. So first of all, we see a revolution that overthrows the monarchy. Then we see a time of preparation leading to the following year in a counter-revolution. So I know it can be complicated because it happens within such a teeny tiny time span, but for our line, we have to expand it over many years. But we're just looking at the main events and the order that they happen in. So first you have a dissatisfied nation, you have a revolution come in, and then a time of preparation for the counter-revolution, and then the counter-revolution comes in, but the counter-revolution ultimately fails. So the first revolution, like the French Revolution, takes us to November 9. We see the rising up of Napoleon, but also the death of Abraham Lincoln in this history, or the abdication of the Kaiser. A government is overthrown, but Hitler also has his epiphany about what he's not required to do, which is as a hero of the people to save them from this defeat. I think I know what I messed up in my head. So this is just, we're not looking at the political parties for Germany. I see what I did now. Okay. So if you put the politics aside, the only thing we're looking at is from October 30th, 1918, and then August, no, it's May. What did we do there? Okay, January 5. January 5, 1919, and we have November 9, 1918. So what we're looking at is just the fact that there's a revolution. And this is World War I. So there's, okay. And then you have a time period of preparation. No. So this is the time period of preparation. And then you have counter-revolution. But it fails, and that was May.
Yeah, and that November 9 was the end of it, and then you had the preparation.
What was in between? Okay, so we didn't have a that's what I'm missing. We didn't have a midway in here. I thought there was a midway. Hold on. I swear there was.
For Midway, she used the French Revolution.
Oh,
Civil War.
yeah. Okay, gotcha.
And then the history of the pre-civil rights, it was in the 50s.
Okay, yeah. So then we had oh, this is driving me nuts when this does this. Hold on. Preparation and then counter-revolution. So the majority of 2020 was like a preparation. And then now that Biden won the election, that's a counter-revolution, right?
Say that again.
So the end of 2019, you have a revolution, but then you have a
No, the revolution began at 9/11. So when you look at that October 30th, 1918, that would have been the beginning of the revolution. So you have on our line, the revolution began, or civil war began 9/11, and it ended on 2019.
okay, I get it. So this whole thing is a revolution.
Right. And then that marks November 9 marks the end of the revolution, then a period of preparation, quiet and preparation, and then the counter revolution.
So then this is 2020, isn't it?
Right.
So this is like 2020, and then here you have 2021. So this is
No, you're almost right. 2021 is still over to the right. I'll open up one of the other ones if you want, but the full, all of them are on, maybe not in the first two studies that you did, but all the lines are together, I think, on the other two studies, so that you see them all together. But the counter-revolution, there's a period of quiet and then the counter-revolution in 2020, but she extends the counter-revolution all the way to 2021.
yeah, the counter-revolution. But I'm talking about the
Yeah.
period of preparation.
The period of preparation is up until I think when it gets marked as the counter-revolution begins with May 25th and the death of George Floyd.
Oh, that's when it begins?
If I have it, I'm gonna put something in the chat here.
Can you open whatever line you're, because I like to see that, because I'm almost there to get it. I'm almost there.
Okay, so I'll have to, oh, you did unshare, okay. Right there. This one doesn't have us on here, or it doesn't have us on here, but it would be this line here that would be, yeah, because she has 2019 here. So all down this line, it's 2019, okay? And then you have 2020. I know it's on one of them. I'll have to try to find it, but it's on one of them where, one second. It's on one of them where she actually shows 20, it's when she puts in the American Revolution. Let me look and see which one I just opened. Number 4, it's where she puts the American Revolution in there as well. Here we go. This is getting more closer to it. So this one here is where she started to put in the American Revolution and marking 2020. So you have this period of preparation and then counter-revolution. And this is 21 is where she marks here is the counter-revolution. You've got the period of preparation, and the counter-revolution was, if I remember correctly, it was May 25th, which is also Concord as well. But it goes all the way through till 2021. But I don't think she ever marked this date here. And I think that's the, hang on, there's one more. Yeah, that's the last, oh wait, one more, sorry. This is the last one of number 4. So, and this doesn't have all of them in there anymore. It only has the French Revolution. and then it has the Civil War, and then she puts the American Revolution here, which was actually before, which confused a lot of people. I don't know that I can explain it right, but she puts the counter-revolution as the American Revolution here. But this period of preparation takes us to 2025, which she lined up 1775, the beginning of the American
2020.
Revolution. Did I, what?
You said 2025.
Oh, sorry, 2020, yeah. So 2020, but the counter-revolution would last, go all the way through until 2021, if I understood correctly. But she never puts a date here.
Because I don't think we have a date for when that happens yet.
Mm-mm.
Because it would have to be like a failure on Biden's part, right?
Yeah, that's the stuff that I was talking with Brother Troy somewhat in the chat that I'm still not completely. I think it's just because all the light's not here yet. Did the
Right.
slide change for you? Or is the same slide showing?
I think it's similar-ish.
I didn't change it. Hang on one second.
Sister Oni, revolution is fighting against the what's established. Counter-revolution is trying to take back what, no, well, the government that was just established by the revolution.
But they will fail.
But they will fail, yeah.
They will fail. Maybe this helps a little bit more because again, she doesn't put that date here. So this is the one that we did last week, the Lines of the Revolution, which was from Canada in July. So she doesn't have all the lines there, just the dates. So you've got German, Russian, and the French Revolution. 9/11, it marks the beginning of each one of these. And then there's the midway point, which was 2014, and she went through all the things that happened at that midway point. That was like a turning point here. And then, so all this here is revolution all the way till November 9. And the purpose is to take down the democracy and establish a new government. And so then we saw that 2014 or 2016, 2019, 2020, all the way till Sunday law is the progressive steps, not of Donald Trump, though she says that Donald Trump was a dictator when he got there, he was, but you can trace the dictatorship all the way back when we became the world superpower and started being a bully, a global bully. So it's this course that the United States or this ship is on that takes you all the way to the Sunday law until in its progressive steps, taking you to a full-blown dictatorship. But this counter-revolution here is to try to overturn it. And so here you want to turn over something so extreme, and what do? You're going to go in here, help me if I'm wrong in this, because this I'm still not all clear of, but here we have Biden, who's the compromiser, who prizes himself at being able to work on both sides of the aisle. And I put in the chat, I can't see the chat, maybe somebody else can read it, but I put in the chat a quote. Actually, I have it still open in the Biden one. And when we went through the Biden notes, it was it was before the election, but it says, preparing to assume the presidency in a divided country, Joe Biden confronts the ultimate test of his principal theory of governance, that compromise is good and modest progress is still progress. So his efforts here are not going to be, they're not going to be the efforts that are necessary to overturn what happened here and stop this ship from getting to shipwreck at Sunday law.
Yeah. It's just interesting that it's going to fail so soon.
You know, well, it's been a long time. When you take it all the way back to 1989, or you take it to 9/11 when it actually began, because 9/11 is when they started, you know, when 9/11 happened, they started to say that there was a judgment. It happened because God's judging us for taking God out of the government and all the schools, and that we need to bring God back in. So there was this progression of bringing God back in all throughout this history. And so there's a lot of things going on all at once, and you know, bit by bit, it comes it comes together like Ezekiel's wheels, it comes together, but there's still missing pieces. I still don't completely understand here because I'm going to read the article that later that Sister Linda posted in there on Bernie, because I kept seeing the pictures of Bernie too, and you guys are a lot more on top of that than I am. I mean, I get that it would have been the extreme to bring about the right thing, but I struggle still to actually see it, how it would have all worked in my head. But if this counter-revolution is to overturn this, then we can see that Biden's working on both sides of the aisle is just going to help them along.
Yeah.
It's just going to help them along to continue out their goal. And all the policies that he's putting in place right now that seem so pro-equality, I mean, he's going to get pushback. And what's he going to do when he gets pushback? I don't know if that's what it looks like, but that's what I wonder. You know, what does it look like then when he gets pushback? Is that where, you know, you start seeing his compromising in all these things?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Counter-revolution goes to Panium, Sister Jackie. The counter-revolution began with the death of George Floyd.
yeah, they're
Okay.
two different lines though, but they kind of
Yeah,
They blend.
blend a little.
Yeah,
Because Panium is just referring to the King of the South getting its death blow,
right.
which,
And that could be in the process even now too.
yeah, with like the demonstrations.
Yes, exactly. That is some big upheaval. I've been getting alerts on it on
Yeah.
my phone. There's
Lex-
millions of people uprising over it.
Yeah, Alexei Navalny did something interesting. He released a video talking about Putin's billion-dollar palace, and that enraged people, plus the fact that he was taken to prison and all the lawlessness that's been happening. But there's a video he released just going over how insanely ludicrous Putin's palace on the Black Sea is and how he lives the way he does with everyone struggling everywhere else.
Yeah, exactly.
Just
So-
showing him as a thief he is.
Sister Oni is asking the difference between a revolution and a counter-revolution. And again, it just, let me go back to that slide. The revolution here was to take down the democracy and replace it with a dictatorship. The counter-revolution, there's no different. I don't think that there's a difference. It's just a matter of who's who. So this is to, in our case here, is to destroy the democracy and establish a dictatorship. And the counter-revolution is to try to undo the dictatorship. It's a new form of government. So to take out one government to replace it with a new government. And in our case, it's democracy to replace it with a dictatorship. But it's to take down the form of government and replace it with a new form of government. The counter-revolution tries to undo the new form of government that gets put in place, if that helped.
Yeah, because the revolution sets up a new government and counter-revolution tries to take that back down again, but it fails.
But it fails, right?
So we're at time, but I put a mark here where we stopped and I'd like to get another spot to kind of finish. And I
We
might
love that.
try to do all the revolutions. That way I get it better in my head. Because
Yeah.
I learned a lot. I learned a lot more about, like, I have a better grasp on the German Revolution, what happened there. So
It really helped me.
We have an opening next Sabbath. You want to do it next Sabbath?
yeah, that would be perfect. So it's still fresh.
Oh yeah, afternoon, good.
Uh-huh.
Nice, good.
Not the worship hour, the afternoon one.
Sister Kathy's there.
Worship hour.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah, that's perfect. No, perfect.
Okay.
And thank you, Elaine, for helping me out there with those other lines that you have, because it's like I was getting confused during this. There's a lot. These ones have always been really difficult for me for some reason.
I would have never gotten it if I didn't go through the process that I did, because it was all just like a big jumbled mess in my head. I never understood it, but putting the notes together really, really helped. But also it was fresh in my mind because last week I did the one that followed up after what Brother Jim and Sister Sue Ellen did from Canada. And it was the lines of the revolutions, because that's where I was wanting to get back to, is to review the lines of the revolutions and review In God We Trust, because there's key things that were said then that are helpful to put it all together today with, it's like hindsight. Is that what hindsight? So all that information was given in advance, but we couldn't see it. But now that we see what's happening, we can go back and understand it better.
Well, it's all building.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know if Biden's gonna get, I don't think it would make sense for him to like get assassinated or anything, because then it's Kamala, and if she goes, then it's Pelosi. So it can't be that. It has to be that Biden just fails to do what the left needs them to do, and he just goes conservative way
Yeah.
for it to fail, I guess. Or the midterms.
Yeah. I think the midterms have got to play a role in it,
Yeah.
because right now right now the Democrats have control basically over everything, though it's a thin margin, very thin. But they do have control in most cases. And I think there's some things, somebody else probably understands this better than I do, but there's some things that require a great more than a majority. And so, those things would be a challenge.
Like a 2/3 majority.
Yeah. So some
Yeah.
of those things that require that. And but it's interesting how they just change all the rules they just go about and change the rules to make it to where it still works one way or the other, but it's just amazing. But anyway, yeah, I don't
Can
know.
I ask, what do you mean that they changed all the rules? What rules did they change?
I've been trying to understand, and maybe somebody else can enlighten me on this more so, but when they're talking about the Mitch McConnell and the, what do they call it?
Yeah, the filibuster's going on
filibuster,
right
thank
now.
you, the
They're
filibuster.
the Democrats are trying to do away with the filibuster.
Which
so that,
has to do
so
with
that
it
the
being a 50-50.
Republicans can't use it against them when, say, Biden signs an executive order. There's no way it's going to go anywhere if they've got a filibuster, because they've got to vote for it on the floor.
Yeah, didn't the filibuster have something to do with having to have like a 2/3? I don't know if
Yes.
thing.
Yes.
So it's like
2/3.
okay, so you can have 50-50, 50% Democrat, 50% Republican, but with the filibuster, there were times that it requires like a 2/3 vote. So that's what I meant by changing the rules to make they can still get what they want. And that's what Mitch McConnell's fighting for right now.
Oh yeah, he's got a strategy. They're not going to just give up and go away. No way.
Right.
Just fall into the pit, with the liberals.
Can I ask a question? Filibuster. So is that something the Republicans want or something the Democrats want?
No, the Republicans want it.
They do want
because
that.
It can block what the liberals are trying to do with passing something.
So does this have anything to do with pushing the impeachment to February 6th, I think, or whatever date they picked in February?
Not necessarily.
Well, they're going to protest on that too. Although, we'll have to see how that looks.
But McConnell wants Trump to be persecuted or prosecuted, to pay for that crime.
Well, he says that, but he's going to go along with his majority in the Senate side. He there's still there's Ted Cruz. There's some really not too good people there to work with, but they want to put on this front that they're all going to be united because they've been so divided.
Yeah, and Sister Christine put in here, because it's the Democrats that want to do away with the filibuster. And if I remember right, it was the Republicans that put it there. But the Democrats want to do away with the filibuster, and the Republicans, or Mitch McConnell, wants to keep it because it'll keep them from being able to have the majority in the, well, I don't know if it's both houses, but it'll keep them, I don't know how that works there. Maybe somebody else does, but but it'll keep them from being able to have hold the majority and be able to get everything sweeping through that they want to do.
So did I reverse that? It's the
I don't know if you did or
Republicans.
not.
Yeah, the Republicans want to keep the filibuster.
Right.
Yeah, it's the liberals that want to get rid of it, or Democrats.
Doesn't Kamala Harris have a final say in stuff as well? Because
Well,
doesn't that what I heard?
She does.
That's only if they get a bill to the floor.
Right.
If they can't get the bill to the floor, she doesn't have a part in breaking a tie.
Oh, okay.
So they have an awful lot of games that they play so yeah, they have an awful lot of games that they play to get what they want.
Has Biden already demonstrated any compromise so far? Like Elder Tess said, right now it looks good. And it does look good. Like, I'm pretty impressed so far. He's overturning a lot of what Trump had, or, changing Trump stuff. So far it looks good, but has he shown anything towards compromise? You guys would probably know more than me, or better than I do.
Not yet.
No?
Yeah,
Okay.
I my own mind, I mean, because I don't understand all things either, and we're going to continue to have more light, but in my own mind, it would seem that if you're going to come and undo all the things that he's undoing, this is going to enrage them even more so, and it'll force, I would think, him to come to the table as being the compromiser that he is. So it seems like he's come, I don't know if I'm following things correctly, but it seems like he's come out of the gate really strong pro-equality, but it's not going to last because he's not really going to be able to get away with the things. He's going to have to, he'll live true to his calling and compromise.
Yeah, but he
I don't know,
has,
that's just my weak bit of understanding so far. We have a lot I know I still have a lot to learn on what this means.
yeah, but he has 4 years, correct? Like, he really
Right.
has 4 years. Like, we don't see anything that he is going to be assassinated. Like
No.
assumption, he can't be. It doesn't fit with the line.
No. Well,
Okay.
I mean, Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah.
Oh,
But
But
it wouldn't, our vice president wouldn't be Republican, it'd be a Democrat, and so is Pelosi, so there's still no way.
yeah. Well, yeah. Okay. Interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know. I thought about that too. I don't know how that fits because there were also the two Whig candidates died in office. So I don't know.
He's old too. He could die. The stress could be really hard on him, and he could easily have a heart attack.
Yeah, I thought about that with being 78 years old. I don't know, but I
It could
guess,
be the moral aspect, right? Like when John the Baptist died in our time, it was a spiritual death.
True. Yeah. That's probably even more realistic because everything's spiritually anyways for us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so he could lose his moral fiber or his fight for the right side. I don't know. Maybe he flips sides or something.
definitely the way to understand it is to totally keep up with the message and understand the lines that have already been presented, and stay within the lines and the rules that we've been taught, and the light will continue to be opening up as we move along.
Yeah. We're at almost 12:45 though, so
Yeah.
I'm gonna pray and close us off. Okay.
Good.
It was a good discussion though. It's really something that I think we've all been thinking about. Okay, dear Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you so much for helping us to look back at the building blocks of our lines where we first started with this message. We thank you for helping us to interrogate them closely to get a good, thorough understanding of what they're trying to tell us and what aspects about them we need to take to our own lives and how we need to do this in a good, correct, parable understanding. We thank you, Lord, for giving us the fortitude and energies to do this so that we can be strong in our understanding and be able to give a good, solid message to those who will come in the future. And we ask that you continue to be with us the rest of this Sabbath day as we continue to learn and draw closer to you in our understanding and development of this message, this light that you've given us to help us and guide us. It is your great mercy and love that brought us to this place, Lord, and we thank you so much for that. And we ask that you continue to be with us in a mighty way. Everyone who is here today, please help them to be able to remember this and help us to have better memories and help us to be strong and disciplined in our studies and in our personal lives and everything that we need to do, Lord, so that we can be good soldiers. We thank you so much for helping us to see things, having the privilege, Lord, to see things as they open up and before they happen, to have an idea of what's going to happen in the future. This is an incredible gift that we have from you, and we thank you so much for this, Lord, for preparing us as you have. And we thank you for the opportunity to fellowship together with each other once again. It's always a beautiful time and absolutely lovely and the best day of the week. And we thank you, Lord, so, so much. Pray all these things. And we also pray a blessing on the food that everyone's about to partake of. Help it to strengthen and nourish all our bodies and give us the energy that we need to understand and listen to the afternoon study. We thank you and we pray all these things in the Lord Jesus Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.